Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast with your host, Andrew Keel. This is the podcast where you can get the education you need to invest 100% passively in the highly profitable niche of mobile home parks.
Welcome to the Passive Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. This is your host, Andrew Keel, and today we have an amazing guest in Mr. Craig Schneider. Before we dive in, I want to ask you a favor. Would you please leave the show a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this podcast? This helps us get more listeners, and it means the absolute world to me. So thanks for making my day with that 5-star review of the show. All right, let's dive in. Craig Schneider is the managing partner at RYZE Communities, and RYZE focuses on value-add opportunities in the mobile home park, RV park, and multifamily real estate space. Their team focuses on revitalizing underperforming assets and partnering with local leaders and communities to improve neighborhoods throughout the country. Craig, we are excited to welcome you to the show.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
Definitely. Can you start out by telling our listeners a little about your story and how you got into manufactured housing communities?
So my background is actually in forensic auditing. I have an accounting degree. I found out that quickly that I didn't have any interest in a desk job. So I started learning more about the real estate industry, worked for an appraiser for a few years, got into property management, and then started doing value add single family flips, transferred to apartment buildings, and then started seeing all over the place the need for affordable housing. And when I first encountered manufactured housing, I said, this is actually a very affordable and great way to live. So we've been doing that for a few years.
I love that. So accounting degree, and I think the most interesting piece is you worked for an appraiser for a few years. Maybe you can shed a little bit of light on that and like how you maybe value the properties, how you use that in your business today, because that's an interesting deal. You know, I have an ongoing joke with a friend of mine. We say, hey, you know, in commercial real estate, it's amazing how appraisers always come back at the exact price that, you know, is on the contract when you're acquiring a property. So maybe you can just share like what you're using from that time in your business today.
It's valuing property and looking at it from all different angles. You know, you may look at a property one way and I may look at it another way. That's why properties sell for a price you may not like or I may like. Also stories behind why people will pay more for a property than an appraiser may even think is accurate. You know, if you got a 1031 exchange, you have to deploy capital, then you may have to overpay a little bit for a property. Or you'll see a property come down in price while it's in contract at A, but it's sold for a lot less because we don't see the due diligence that happen behind the scenes. But the appraiser sees all that information and they take that into account, as well as they look at other economic factors in the area, not just income and expense. So that does always help me as well with my accounting degree.
Very nice. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Let's jump right in, man. What do you think is the toughest hurdle to overcome in mobile home park investing and ownership?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand the asset class. It's a little bit different than apartments. You may have, a 5-story building with, 20 units on each floor. It's individual homes. It's pretty much what it is. It's the tiny home that everyone's trying to develop for affordable housing. So I don't think people understand that. I don't think people understand the way they're constructed. It's a little bit of a different kind of repair. They shift over time. Setting pads up is a different animal than doing a foundation for a house. So those are things that people have to learn as they're getting into the business. And that's why you really need a strong team around you.
Definitely. So what's the toughest hurdle, would you say? If you had to just like what the one
The toughest hurdle is it's managing people in any business, right? It's also from contractors to due diligence to talking with attorneys to financing. You got to be able to talk to different people and manage them, all different kinds of people from all different walks of life. That's really what it comes down to. Because you may buy a park from a mom and pop versus, a big brokerage house. You're managing and talking and communicating with those individuals. You got to have a different mindset.
Definitely. Maybe you can share your story. Like, when did you buy your first mobile home community, Craig?
So it took us many years to find our first one. We had a lot of people telling us, go back to apartments, go back to apartments. You're spending too much time on this. And then in 2019, we finally hit our first one. It took us about 2 years since we first saw it to actually close on it. And that's really been our story is we look at every property we've owned. It takes at least 12 to 24 months before we could actually contract and close. And now we have, 10 properties, in Northeast Florida.
Tell me about that 12 to 24 months to close it. Why is that? What transpired? Because that seems
So we try
long.
to, it is long. So we try to build relationships with the sellers. And that's usually a long-term process. Sellers don't want to get a phone call, hey, you want to sell your property. So we don't do that. We try to build relationships so people know who we are. People in the community now know who we are as well. So we'll get introduced to someone and then we'll reach out to them, 5, 6, 7 times a year. We'll be in the area, we'll stop by and say hello. And then all of a sudden they'll say, I'm thinking about maybe it's time to move on, or I found another asset that I really need capital for. And that relationship takes time to grow. And that's how you get building a relationship. And then all of a sudden, that person knew someone else who has a property that they may be interested in selling. So that's why it takes 12 to 24 months for us to find a property and then to purchase it. The first one, obviously, once we were in contract, had a lot of issues that came up over time, and due diligence can't be rushed. It's just a different kind of animal. Each of these individual homes, plumbing, the electric on them. So there's a lot of different different aspects that go into these properties.
Definitely. So 2019 was your first park. And I think, before we were recording, you said you're up to 350 lots now,
Yes,
and those are all in Northeast Florida.
correct.
Okay. So you probably have a specified area, around Northeast Florida that you're targeting, and there's only a certain number of mobile home parks there, and that's your target market that you're focusing on purchasing. Is that right? You're very geographically located, centered.
For right there, we have our own management team, our own maintenance team,
Mm,
so it gives us a little bit more strength. But we are looking in other parts of the country, other parts of the South, Texas as well, for larger properties, and versus, let's just say, accumulating a whole bunch of, 30, 40, 50 unit properties.
gotcha. Yeah. How many lots was that first park, and maybe share a little bit about the portfolio and the other parks you guys have.
So that first park was originally, we were told it was 32. We found out actually it was 38. So that particular one was actually sandwiched in between two other larger uh, larger mobile home parks. And we didn't originally have access to all the records from the old owner. All of a sudden, we started seeing a lot of discrepancies between, the leases, rent collected, rent paid. So that's one of the reasons that one took a long time. But once you get the first one going, we look at it like it's like a rusty wheel. It takes some time to get the oil and lube. And then we started with another property that we got connected with through a mobile home retail connector, sales. And that one was a family, it's been their family forever. And, that was actually looked at it, met with them, and it took a long time to close that deal, but they were finally ready to retire and didn't want the headache. So we were able to transition that one. And our second to last one is a really nice park. It's 93 spaces, and it's actually very unique where each of the lots is direct connect to city water and city sewer. So, a lot of these parks is one line that comes in and then it's a landlord's responsibility. But this particular one, individual meters, which is really awesome. And lots that are about 50 by 100 each. So people come in, they're like, wow, this is not my anticipated mobile home park. And our last one we worked on for probably 18 months, where the guy wanted to sell, didn't want to sell. And then he said, well, my daughter's getting married. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And he had other people that always jerk him around. And we always say, look, if we're going to do the deal, we're ready to go. We're always produce and perform, which also has helped us out over the years. So that was our last one that we purchased.
Wow. So 350 lots across 4 parks. Is that right?
Well, we actually have, of those, there's 8 of those parks, about 350. Yes.
8. Okay. Very nice. You mentioned something a little earlier about having your own maintenance team. So
Yes.
I'm guessing that you're a fan of the park-owned home model. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that and how you chose that model versus the tenant-owned home model.
That was kind of chosen for us with a lot of the homes that we do have in these properties. But the way we look at it is there's a lot of rent that gets lost between having a tenant-owned home versus a park-owned home. And we're like, well, if we have all these parks in one area, it's easier for us to maintain and take care of them. Now, if you said, Craig, I want to sell you a park in, Columbus, Ohio, I'm going to say, okay, it's got to be 150, and I would want tenant-owned homes, not park-owned homes, obviously. But because we have so much in one geographic area, we have the ability to have a full-time construction crew and we have a full-time maintenance crew. So if you don't have to be renovated, we just send our guys in, they know what to do, the turnover's quick, and it gets back on the market. So the way we look at it is, okay, well, if I can get, 600 for lot rent or 1,000 to 1,200 for lot and home rent, the $600 a month, is it really costing us the $600 a month additional to rent a home out? And with having our own in-house staff, we feel as though that we actually make more profit on being able to rent those out.
Okay. So in your 350 lots, how many are park-owned homes?
I would say 90%.
90%. Wow.
Yep.
And you said how much do you get for a park-owned home, like as a straight rental?
It depends on the area and the size. We have some small 2-1s, that'll be 850, and we have some 1,600 square foot double wides that run some of these parks. You'll get 1,350, for some of those. So they range
Wow.
all in between and the location.
Sure, sure. Wow. Yeah. I think that's an interesting model. I know Chris Rude, he loves that same exact model where you're able to just rent these things for such a higher amount. My friendly debate, because I prefer
Mhm.
tenant-owned homes, but
Yes.
as a friendly debate for me is, I think the tenant-owned homes, they're going to take care of the homes more. Personally, like you mentioned earlier that like how mobile homes are constructed, right? And I think that's key. And I do as well. And they're not constructed very
Yeah.
durable, right? They're not constructed as
Correct.
well as a typical block home would be, or even a stick-built home. So
Mhm.
the drywall's thinner, the doors are different sizes, the windows are different sizes. You got to custom order them from across the country. So I'm just wondering, like, what is a typical expense ratio on one of your projects?
So it depends on the age of the home. Since we have so many homes, we bulk have material that we store. So if I'm renovating a home, we have a lot of it all ready to go. What we have basically 20 sets of appliances that are ready to go. So if I have to put an appliance in, they could just go take it, clock it out and move it to a location.
You're making me sweat a little bit. Oh, you just said you got appliances. So if someone says, oh, my oven isn't working, my stove isn't working, you're in charge of repairing that and everything from the appliances all through everything.
So one of the things we also do is in a lease, we have a tenant sign it. And when they sign a lease, they go through and they checklist the property and everything is working. And in our lease, it's very specific. If it doesn't work as a result of negligence, we do not replace it. And then you're on your own. And we have tenants who've replaced their own appliances. If it's something that the stove just went, we always replace it. But that's why we have a maintenance crew that
Yeah.
handles all those issues.
I think it
Um,
definitely helps to be so geographically, close to each other, because then, you're going to just be able to have that team. But yeah, I'm
yes.
sure. How many maintenance requests do you get a month just on average?
It really ranges. We'll go 2 or 3 days with none, and then yesterday we had 5. So it all depends on the actual. It's
Sure.
just so random. Who knows? But we're very lucky to have a maintenance crew to handle that. Plus, when we renovate the homes, we do it a certain way to make it better. Like, we always do overhangs. So the water is always, as you know, a big issue in mobile homes.
Mm.
So we always make sure we have all the overhangs, the caulking's all done throughout to make it really strong. We reinforce the floor in all of these. And, those kind of things are very preventative maintenance, which keeps the place clean and neat. But we're very lucky because we're in one location mainly that we get a lot of referrals for rentals. So we have people saying, I live at one unit, my friend's looking for something else. So to have that referral basis also helps us with the renting. Then we also do background checks on the tenants before we take them. We're very strict on, backgrounds that we require for someone to move in. And that also helps us have better tenants.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a ton of ways to make money in manufactured housing and a ton of different ways to do it. So that's pretty cool. You have a good model.
I wouldn't
It
recommend it
seems.
for someone who has, let's say, a 12 unit in one spot and a 12 unit then in a different part of a state. Then I absolutely wouldn't do it. I think it only works if you're going to have a strong area
Proximity.
and one has to be in one
Yeah.
area. Yeah, and you have to have your own team. If you have to sub out work, you're done.
And that's the other
So you
thing is
have to do
like,
it.
you know, the type of work, right? The maintenance crew guys, that team, in my experience, when I've been doing big value add projects, we're rehabbing 12 homes at once, that there's a lot of churn, right? In that type of client, that type of, you know, handyman person, they seem to you churn through a lot. So I applaud you for being able to do it, but it has to be tough to keep up with it in my experience.
It's hard, but we take care of, we work as a team. The way we look at it is we all have to work together.
Mhm.
And we tell the guys who are doing the maintenance, what could we do to make life easier for you? And we've been very lucky, people wanting to come work with us and continue to work with us because they see we take care of everybody. And there's a goal together, which is we all go together. We want everyone who works for us actually to have someone underneath them and to oversee them and be responsible for them. And that's been very helpful for us.
That's awesome. How has
Mm.
your mobile home park investing strategy changed over your time in the business, if it has at all?
Well, we're starting to the process right now where we are looking for a larger mobile home parks as well. So that's what we're up with right now is
Why is
we're
that?
because it's just easier to finance from a bank's perspective. And that's one of the things that obviously we're trying to accomplish is have a long-term relationship with banks. And
Let's
if we
talk
do
about,
venture, yeah,
sorry, you just brought up a
that's
good
okay.
point. The park owned home model versus the tenant owned home model when you're financing these things. From my experience, the top lenders, the agency, the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they prefer the tenant owned homes, model, and they prefer less
Correct.
than, I think it's 25% park owned homes. So, are you able to get non-recourse on the loans you're putting on your properties?
No, so we guarantee the loans, but we're very comfortable with that because if you have 30 homes times $600 additional rent, you have a lot of cushion in the homes. So that's really been very helpful. And also being in Northeast Florida, we know a lot of what's going on with a lot of positives going on in the area, companies relocating. We will get, if we put one ad out, we'll get 8 to 10 people reach out a day for one mobile home. Of that, I would say 50% are from out of town relocating for work.
Wow.
So, so we do feel comfortable with taking on that particular risk. But one of the things with financing, people get turned off very easily. But one of the things we do is we're constantly calling banks, constantly trying to build the relationships. And we've been very lucky with that. And we've been able to refinance all the ones that we've completed already.
That's fantastic. Kudos to you for that. Yeah, you know, we own, it's more spread out across mainly the Midwest, but one of our goals is to get it refinanced into agency debt, where you're getting that long-term 10 plus year fixed rate, lower rates, non-recourse obviously is a big benefit. But yeah, there's definitely some of those regional lenders that are still offering really good terms, those credit union types. they just require that guarantee.
Yeah.
But that's good. What do you feel is the best opportunity or strategy right now for mobile home park investing, given where we're at in the cycle?
I think this is such an asset class that still has so much potential to it. You know,
Mhm.
we used to invest in New York, from New York originally, right? And I talked to people up there, and they used to like mobile home parks. What are you talking about? And then a few people saw that, and they're like, "Oh, how do I invest?" There's so many people that just don't understand the asset class. And I tell them, I said, I'd rather live in a mobile home park where I could pull my car right up to the door. I could my groceries in. If you have kids, you could carry all the kids stuff in and out. Versus, I used to live in Queens in the city, and I have to find a spot. Hopefully the snow's not there. Carry multiple trips of stuff up and down, and there's nowhere to go. Here, I think it's a better lifestyle. So I think more people are going to learn and more people are going to experience it. I think it's going to continue to grow. I mean, we definitely get more of a demand for the mobile homes and the apartments that we have, especially if you have a noisy neighbor. Then people get really
Oh,
turned off from
yeah,
apartments.
or someone above you, that's making a lot of
Yes,
noise, or you name it. They have a dog and you're hearing the footsteps,
yes,
all night and early mornings. Yeah, I've been there in that situation. And yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a way better way to live. It's the American dream, right? You have your own space, you have your own, little yard area and everything. So let me
yeah.
ask you this, Craig. What mistakes in mobile home park investing have you made that, our listeners could learn from? And me, I'll learn from you.
Well, I've made a lot. We constantly make them pretty much every day. You just have to learn from them, right? So I think the biggest mistake was one is if many. First off, we should have went bigger. One, two, we should have probably bought every property, obviously, 2 years ago that came across our plates. So that was another issue. But I'd say that the biggest mistake is we talked ourselves out of some deals because there's a lot of hair on them. We had some opportunities to purchase some properties, and these homes were extremely rough. We didn't know what we were doing. Some of them, like the roofs caved in. They're garbage. I mean, they just take it off the lot. And we're like, well, I don't know if we should do it. We don't know the avenue. And I'll say when I first got into real estate, someone told me, stop, you can read so much podcasting, do it. And as soon as we bought our first mobile home, we sat back and said, wow, we should have bought the other ones. That was a mistake that we made, just being a little too hesitant. And sometimes you just got to jump in and do it, especially if you feel, very strong about an area and about the demographics of an area. So I would say the biggest mistake is we're too hesitant about doing certain deals, and especially big enough deals. So we definitely know that that won't happen again.
How did you get educated on the space, Craig? You mentioned podcasts. What other avenues did you use to kind of learn about this and the differences? Because I know you got into apartments before, right? And then you moved into
Yes.
this.
So podcasts, I'm always trying to learn and listen from all different backgrounds of people. Try to learn from everybody. Everybody's got a story and how they got to, like, how you and I got to sitting right here, right now. It's amazing. So that's what I try to do. Is I try to learn and listen from everybody. Podcast, I always reading books. Uh, my business partner will tell you I'll talk to everybody and anybody. I'm getting gas. I talk to the guy behind the counter. My attorney said to me, I know you're going to ask anyone selling. And that's how you start learning about different asset classes, because someone may say, oh, I don't do that. I do this. And that's how we started getting into mobile home parks. Someone's like, well, I hear about these mobile home parks and I don't know anything about it. So the first thing I did, I went on podcasts. I go online and Googled it, and I started talking to people. And that's how you do it. Just talk to everybody, because there's always somebody, and everybody wants to tell you their story. So that's the best advice I always tell people. Talk to no matter what you want to do, laundromat, want to be an accountant, go talk to them. They'll tell you the true story.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. If you were a passive investor and you were looking for, a way to put some money to work, what would you say is like the most important things that a passive investor needs to look out for when investing into mobile home parks or a mobile home park deal with another operator?
I think they need to see the experience that this person has in the industry, because like you said, the financing is much more difficult than an apartment building. Yes, as a history of what they've accomplished is probably the most important thing. Having some sort of construction knowledge, not just relying on subs. If you rely on subs, you're going to get taken. It's just part of it, because unfortunately for the sub, they'll open up walls and not experience or expect what's behind there, and they have a lot of change orders. So to me, it's track record is the biggest issue.
Yeah, that's a big one. What would be your number two?
I would probably also say demographic they're investing in, the location they're investing in. And you and I have spoke about how the population in this country is changing and where they're going. So if they're investing in areas with very strong rent regulation and difficulty for evictions, that tells me it's not a person I would want to invest in. I'd want to invest in someone where the population's going, the job's going, and they should be able to tell me and educate me on why they're investing in this location versus that location without hesitating. So
That's good. I mean, the first two were so good. Do you have a third?
I'm going to stop there.
All right. What does the perfect mobile home park look like in your eyes, and why, Craig?
I would say the perfect mobile home park, there isn't one. Again, like you said, you like one, I like another one. Depends on the location. The perfect mobile home park to me, it's the utilities setup has to be bulletproof, because you have all these tenants that want to put laundry and then they put the clothing down, or the grease goes down. But to me, I can't stress enough the utilities. And I tell people at that park that we spoke about earlier that has separate utilities for each unit. And I can't tell you how grateful we are to have a park like that. And I
Yeah.
wish there was a way to have every park like that. So, because once you have that, you could work around anything else. You could bring in new homes, you could repair homes, you could change the tenant base. But the changing the utilities is such a large expense that it's very difficult to do. So to me, that's one of them, and also the location of the park. I got a lot of parks put in front of me, and I look at the demographics and I see declining population. I don't see any jobs there. And those are two things that are very difficult. So to me, the perfect park has to start with strong utilities and strong demographics.
Yep. Those are great. How big would it be? I know go bigger, faster is one I wrote down on my
Yes.
notepad here.
Yes. Well, for a first person starting out, I would say it depends on their bandwidth, financial time frame. If I was a single person putting some money in and I was local to a 20-unit park, I wouldn't be afraid of it. I would jump at it, even a 5-unit park. But for someone like what we're looking for right now is 100, 150 up. Trying to work on a 300 space park right now, but
Wow.
that's what we're trying to do.
Very cool. What does the future of mobile home park investing look like, and how do you see mobile home parks fitting in with the direction the economy is going? It's 2023. Everybody
Mhm.
is mentioning this buzzword of a recession. Interest rates are high. There's obviously the Feds saying they're going to keep going up. So how do you think mobile home parks fits into all that?
I think it's going to keep expanding. I think people are going to start to say, you still have the people, it depends on your location in the country. You still have a lot of people fleeing, the northern part of the country, the cold weather, the high taxed areas. And a lot of those people, maybe don't want to own a home or can't afford a home. And now they could go either rent a mobile home from someone like myself, or if they do want to own, to go buy a home for $150,000, $100,000, whatever it is, versus going to buy a stick-built home for 250 to 350. It's a very affordable option. And I've been in this industry long enough that 6-7% rates still aren't what they used to be. People forget what rates used to be at one point. So I also think that people, a lot of the apartment buildings we had in New York, it's no, they look at these rents and they're like, well, I can't afford them, because you have a lot of multi-generational people living in those units. But they start seeing what's going on in other parts of the country, the Carolinas, the Tennessees, the Georgias, the Floridas, obviously. And instead of having to live with 3 or 4 generations, their family, the main family, could live in their own unit. And a mobile home park gives a family the benefit of having the parents living in one part of the park, one of the brothers living another part, and another family living another part. of the park. So you still get to live close knit as a family, but you get to have your own roof and your own space, which is what that offers, I would say, compared to, buying a home, which I think as rates go up, like you said, with the recession coming, people may be more hesitant, but buying a mobile home not going to be as affected, I don't think, as if you go to buy a $300,000-$400,000 house.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I think there's this movement of lifestyle too. People would prefer to have, think of that. If you're going to take on a mortgage for $150,000 house or higher, versus paying $300 a month and paying lot rent and living in a mobile home. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. You're going to be able to have so much more freedom, and you're not going to be chained to a job that you have to go to pay for that house that really you bought to keep up with the Joneses, right? So I think there's the millennial generation, I think is more aware of that trade-off, and they're open to lower cost housing. So I think it'll be interesting.
It's also easier to sell something that costs less, right? There's more buyers for it. So if you bought the mobile home and you're paying it off, and let's just say you want to relocate, you want to change, whatever your story is, for you to transfer that, so sell that to someone else, it's easier for someone else to take on, That's why I look at it as a positive.
Yeah, and you look at these 30-year mortgages, right? And like, I think I read something the other day, the average person moves like every 5 to 7 years, something like that. So like you're paying all interest the first,
Yes.
5 to 7 years of a 30-year mortgage, right? So you're paying all this interest, and then you're moving, and you need a bigger house because you had kids, or whatever the case is, and it gets really expensive, and it's not
Absolutely.
really helping the American people because of that amortization schedule. It's actually hurting them if they're moving that often. And yeah, with home appreciation, the last 20 years, it's been great. Everybody's won, but I don't think we can bet on that the next 5 to 10. We'll see what happens.
It's also quality of life. And I see in these parks that we have, a lot of these people become like a neighborhood. I see one person will pick up, 5 kids at the bus stop and then walk them back to their mobile home. So you have that neighborhood, which is great, but you don't have the annoyances of an apartment building where you're like, oh, the baby's crying again, the dog's running around. So you have that neighborhood feel with some separation. And I think that lifestyle is just, you can't match it right now.
I agree, man. Well, hey, Craig, it was awesome having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Anytime.
If any of our listeners would like to get a hold of you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
You could email me at Craig, CRAIG, at RYZE, RYZE Communities.com, or I'm on LinkedIn. So either way works.
Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes as well, Craig. But thanks again for coming on the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Andrew. Talk to you soon. Be well.
That's it for today, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hey, are you getting value out of this show? If so, would you mind please going over to iTunes and leaving the show a quick 5-star review? I have a goal of hitting over 100 5-star reviews by the end of 2021, and it would mean the absolute world to me if you could help contribute to that. Thanks ahead of time for making my day with your 5-star review of the show.